Baruch Hashem, every time I hit record, I always feel good about it. Because it's, of course, those times when I don't hit it that somebody says, so do you have a recording of your class? I'm like, oh, okay. We are on Parashat Shemot. Parashat Shemot, the very well-known story. My husband and I would talk about it every week, what we're up to. And it feels like Bereshit, the whole book of Bereshit just zooms through so many years and so many generations. And then everything slows down from Parashat Shemot. Although a lot happens in Parashat Shemot. I mean, Moshe actually gets to age 80 in Parashat Shemot. So there are a lot of years, but it's the beginning of the story of the Jewish people, as a nation. And then, basically from Shemot, it's another 40 years until we get to the end of Dvarim. So the Torah, as we know, is not exactly a history book, because even though it has history in it, it doesn't recount history the same way a history book would. And it zooms, and only stops when it thinks there's something interesting for us to know. Does that make sense to people? Somebody once explained the Torah to me that way, and that just made a lot of sense to do that. It could zoom past many, many intersections, and then it could stop at one intersection, zoom along more, and then it could also stop at an intersection and go to the next one, as we know. Okay, this parasha, anybody want to take a stab at summarizing some, or just mentioning in brief some of the things that happen in the parasha? We're not a lot of people. I think most people could unmute. I don't want you to feel bad about it. We're really a small group, and most people are named Robert or Moshe if you're a man. So just pointing that out. And some people are named Robert and Moshe, just saying. So people are really welcome to stay off mute, because we're such a small class, if you would like. And anybody want to take a stab? Come on, we all know the story. These are the names of Bnei Israel. Hi, Karen. Anybody? Go ahead, Karen. Take a stab. Go for it. What's the story in Shemot? No. You know Moshe, that story. Remember? The Nile killing babies?
What? That they all the male babies, and Moshe's mother puts him in a basket.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
Daughter finds him and raises
him. So what happens right? All that, exactly. That's the story. I'm trying to refresh people's memories. Right? Let's dust off the cobwebs from a year ago. So before that, what happens? Remember, we had 70 people who came down to Mitzrayim in Yaakov's family. It's not really 70 people, because there were also women, but that's part of our tradition to say that there was 70 people. They are mentioned, the people, but mostly the men are mentioned. We assume they're women or there wouldn't be children. And they come down and they live in Goshen. They seem to be getting along just fine, except that they start multiplying. And as often happens, people are wary of the stranger, of the people who don't seem to fit in. And that's what happens in Mitzrayim. And Paro, if you're speaking to us, Todd, you're on mute. If you're not speaking to us, that's fine. But if you are, you want to unmute. Yes, no? Okay, if you unmute, you are welcome to speak. So what happens is that Pharaoh turns them into a slave nation. And there are many midrashim about that. And some of the connections, remember, this isn't a class about the Torah portion, even though that's also fun. And I would also anytime want to do that, but it's also really fun to do the Haftarah. And what I love to do more than anything else is see where the connections are to the Torah portion. So I want you to know, even though this Torah portion is full of so many things, right? Moshe is born, and then there's the edict that Pharaoh says to the midwives, you should kill the baby boys when they're born. And then he says, when that doesn't work, he says, all the Egyptians, you should throw the baby boys in the Nile, because he's trying to eradicate the Jewish nation, because he figured if there's no Jewish men, then the Jewish women either won't get pregnant or they'll end up marrying Egyptians, I guess, and become Egyptian, let's say. And that, by the way, at the time, Judaism went patrilineal, not matrilineal. I know it's kind of bends our minds to think that way, but it did switch at some point. So all that, and Moshe is born, and we know he's going to be the savior. And there's so many midrashim around this that you probably think some of those midrashim were actually written in the Torah, And it would surprise you when you'd start looking for it, like Miriam standing up to her father and telling him that he should take Yocheved back and they should get married and that he's going to have a baby who will save the nation. That's a midrash. That's actually not written in the text. Beautiful, not written in the text. And then his mother, Yocheved, has Moshe, and she's able to hide him so that they won't kill him for 3 months. I don't know where the feedback is coming from, so I apologize. After I told everybody to unmute, I'm going to mute you, but please feel free to unmute when you want to speak. Oh, I think I took care of that. So I'm sorry, Karen or Faye, if I just think I was getting feedback from one of you. And all of this happens, and then Moshe gets saved by Bat Paro, as Karen told us. And by the way, thank you, Milton. One of the more beautiful midrashim that I love, which maybe you're not familiar with, is that it says that Bat Paro, the daughter Paro, maybe went down to bathe. By the way, one of the midrashim is she went down to bathe to dunk in a mikveh of the Nile and become Jewish. Now, that's kind of cool, because how else could she be Moshe's mother? But that's not what it says in the text. But what it does say she stretched is that she sent her Amma. Now, an Amma has different meanings in Hebrew. One of the meanings, and I know it's the forearm, an Amma is the forearm, and an Amma is also a maidservant. So any thoughts about why Amma would be both forearm and maidservant? Just trying to get people to talk. Ted, go for it, but you have to unmute. No? Yes? Anybody? Phyllis, Ted, somebody? Well, you can imagine go, Phyllis, but you have to unmute.
Sorry, we're having computer issues. So in addition to listening to you, we keep coming up with unable to establish secure connection to Zoom. So in case we seem distracted, that's what's going on.
Well, from our point of view, you're totally secure. So just saying.
Okay.
All right. So an Amma, if you have a lady, meaning a lady of stature, she's not going to do menial work. So her forearm, her hands are going to be her maidservants. Her maidservant's going to do the work of her hands. Does that make sense? That's why in Hebrew, often the same word can have different meanings, but almost always it makes sense in some level. So in the Torah, it says she sent her Amma. So she could have sent her maidservant to collect this little boy. And that's where the Midrash comes, the Midrash, that her forearm stretched and grew, because Amma can mean either forearm or maidservant. It's just one way to show how Midrash and text, and Pshat, they both fit the text in different ways. And it's always interesting, by the way, to see which one Rashi considers the simple meaning of the text. Like possibly she didn't want to send her maidservant because she didn't want her maidservant to be punished in case it was, clearly this baby was being hidden. So, there was some problem there. Everybody following? Okay. So Moshe ends up, remember Miriam is watching from afar, and she says this actually is connected. So I'm telling you things that might be connected. She says to Bat Paro, I will find you a wet nurse. And so there's a medrash about that as well, which we'll get to when we talk about the Haftarah, and to nurse the baby. And after 2 years, I think, or 3 years, whenever he was weaned, he comes to the palace and is brought up in the palace as Bat Paro's son. Bat Paro is the daughter of Paro, and he's brought up a son. And then when he gets older, Vayigdal Moshe, he grew up, he looked around, he saw what was going on with his brethren, and that's the story of him seeing an Egyptian striking a Jew, and he kills the Egyptian. Then he sees 2 Jews, and he ends up running away from Egypt, and he ends up by Yitro in Midian, and he meets what Robert Alter calls a type scene. Oh, another Robert, there you go. Calls a type scene in the Torah, which is the well type scene, which is where somebody meets somebody at the well and then becomes betrothed. So that happened with the servant and Rivka, and then with Yaakov and Rachel, and it happens with Moshe and the 7 daughters of Yitro. And he ends up marrying Zipporah, everybody with me? And he becomes Yitro's, he's shepherding the flock, and and then he turns aside to the burning bush. So all of those things, see exactly what the end is. So the end is that God tasks him to be the leader. He doesn't want to. He pushes back until God got upset with him. He says, I'm kvad pevik of lashon, heavy of tongue. I can't speak. I'm not a good speaker. I'm not a good public speaker. And in the end, he does agree, and he goes to, and he meets his brother Aharon, who's 3 years older. He goes back to Egypt. They go to Pharaoh, and okay, that's more or less the end of the Parsha. Everybody with me on the Parsha? We got the stories, and this is easy because it's story. Some of the Parsha are not stories. As I said, this Torah is not exactly a history book. Okay, now we go into the Haftarah. So for those who are looking in your own, it's, first of all, there's more than one option for Haftarah. Do you know that? We've spoken about that. The Ashkenazi often and the Sephardic is not the same. Sorry, Ashkenazic and Sephardic. That's what it would be. Sometimes there's more than one. Sometimes it's three. Chabad does one way. This one does another way. We follow the Ashkenazic, and this actually doesn't seem to have a very straightforward connection to the Parsha. Now, you think the Parsha has so many things going on in it. How hard would that be? And yet, the different books that I read worked really hard, and each one seemed to find a slightly different connection. So it's Yeshayahu. It's actually in two pieces. It's Yeshayahu 27, chapter 27, verse 6, straight through to 28:13, and then it jumps to 29. It skips and jumps. Anybody have an idea why when the sages set up, why could there be a reason that they would patch together two different things and skip? Anybody have even a thought of why that could be? Anybody? Very quiet. So here's one reason. Go.
One reason is that they never want to end on a negative.
Never end on a down note. Exactly. Always end on the high note. Isn't there a thing about that? Oh, I think that was in not Friends. What's his name? George Constanza. I think he said that once on Seinfeld. Always leave him laughing. Always leave on a high note. Okay, we can leave on a high note. So that's, obviously he took that from the Haftarah. So the Haftarah never wants to end on a completely sad note. Like even, Tisha B'Av, even on the saddest days, there's always a try. They try, if they can, the Chazal, our sages who put together the Haftarah, which, by the way, still, remember we said it's not 100% clear who did it, but we have certain traditions. So if the perek, the chapter that they chose leaves us on a sad, mournful, or disparaging, is that the right word when you put somebody down? A disparaging note about Bnei Israel or about the land of Israel, the sages will always take, not random, but two psukim or a few psukim so that it ends on a high note. That is exactly what happens here. So I'm just telling that to be. So we're in Yeshayahu chapter 27. Give me a moment to pull it up. Sorry, it disappeared for me. Okay. So we're not starting at the beginning of a chapter. We are starting in the middle of a chapter on verse 6. So one of the commentaries that I was reading said it wasn't so clear what the context was. So I went back to check previous chapters and what happened before. But we're going to start here. We got a good feel. I think we have a pretty good feel of what went on in the Parsha. Here's the first pasuk. Habaim, those who come. Now don't look at the English yet. Habaim, those who come. Yashresh Yaakov. So Yaakov, which by the way, Yaakov is often a representative euphemism for Israel, for Jews. So Habaim, those who come, Yashresh Yaakov will strike root. Shoresh is a root. Shorashim are physical roots and also like the root of a verb or root. It's the same thing in English. So Yashresh is the verb form of the word shoresh. Okay, that's one phrase. Yatzitz ufarach Israel. So first of all, this is beautiful. Somebody help me with poetry. What is it called when you have a balance in poetry? You say the same thing in a slightly different way and it balances. I know there's a name for it.
Parallelism?
Parallelism. Yep. Who said that?
Lance.
Oh, welcome. Excellent. You came on just the right time. Ted, were you about to say that, Ted? Parallelism. Perfect. So Lance and Ted, you are totally in agreement here, and that was the right word. And that's what it's called in Hebrew as well, hakbala, and makbil means parallel. So those who come will strike root, Yaakov, or Yaakov will strike root. Yatzitz ufarach, shall sprout and blossom Israel, Israel. Now remember, Yaakov is called Yaakov and Israel, even though he was given a new name by the angel and by God. He's still always called sometimes Yaakov, sometimes Israel, even though we're called Bnei Israel, but we're also called Bnei Yaakov. So this is a perfect parallelism. Umal'u fnei tevel tenuva. And the face of the world shall be covered with fruit. So first of all, I just want to say this first pasuk feels so warm and lovely and feels really, really good. It's not going to stay there. And in general, that's what I find difficult. I mean, I know Ted, this and Lance also, I think this is your forte, like you love delving into this. I find it hard with this poetry to connect it, to understand the flow. I love poetry in general, but I do have a hard time finding the flow, which is why it really helps when people do the work for me and at least show me the kind of flow. But at least the first pasuk sounds lovely. And what I want to ask you, who do you think are the ba'im, those who come? Those who come. Any thoughts?
Future generations.
Nice. Future generation. Was that Phyllis?
Yep, that was me.
Yeah, haba'im. Beautiful. So this feels like a positive nivu'ah prophecy that those in future generations, remember Yeshayahu lives around the time he's prophesizing, is that how you say? Prophesying. The Chorban, around the time of the Chorban, I think. Am I right about that? Or prophesying that there will be, but he's also giving hope that Haba'im, those in future generations, beautiful. Okay, anybody else? Just looking because there are 4 different explanations. So just a minute that I wrote here. Here we go. Okay, yes. So one of them is people. Yes, one of them is people. Rashi says that. Thank you, Phyllis. You and Rashi you're following Rashi clearly here. And he says, and here's beautiful. Oh, you're going to love this one, I think. What is the first verse in our parsha? Anybody know?
These are the people that came with Jacob.
Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Israel. These are the names of the children of Israel. Haba'im, who are coming, Mitzrayim, to Mitzrayim. Ve'ele. So look, there we do see a little nugget, by the way. In all the books that I read, there was only one that quoted the Haba'im, that word who are coming, that said, oh, there's a textual connection, but I thought that was really, really nice and a nice way because it was hard to connect this Haftarah. And I thought that was really nice. So because in the Parsha, it's Haba'im as people, so then maybe it's like Phyllis says, and Rashi, Phyllis and Rashi, say, Rashi, Phyllis, Rashi, say that it's the people who are coming, they will take root, they will flourish, they will bear fruit. Perfect. What else could it mean? I'm telling you, there were 4, I think there were 3 or 4 here. 4. Any other ideas? By the way, the others are more esoteric, so don't, I also would have said those who come are people. Any other ideas?
Isn't it? I mean, it has in the brackets there, in days to come.
Yes. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm not looking at that. So yeah, very nice. So, there's a pasuk, Hine yamim ba'im. I can't remember where that's from. So there's a very famous, and I think that's done more often than that. Hine yamim ba'im. Behold, days will be coming. So this is about time. I mean, it's not so different, Phyllis, because it's future. It is interesting to note that the same word could have different meanings. I'm going to go back to the screen. In days.
Rabbanit Bracha.
Yes, Lance.
How about my house is a house of prayer for all peoples?
Ki beiti beit tefillah l'chol
That
ha'amim.
ties in with the world. In other words,
Where, show me.
the whole world.
In this pasuk or further on?
No, isn't world in there?
No, it is not in there. It's actually Yaakov and Yisrael. We haven't gotten there yet. If there's world, it's further down. I think this Haftarah is actually about Bnei Israel. It really is about Jews. It really is, as far as I could see. But let's stay with this pasuk for a moment, Lance. And if world comes up, then we can go there. Okay, so we have 2. We have Yamim Ba'im, that days will be coming. which also actually makes sense that in future days, Yashresh Yaakov will put down roots. Yatzitzu Farach Israel, in future days, that will happen. So that feels like a beautiful kind of time-centered prophecy. Then we also have people, Anashim Ba'im, people are coming, which fits with the Parsha. Here's another one. And anybody who wants to, please, if I don't see you, because I don't see everybody when I'm sharing the screen, then another one is, 1 minute. The Malbim. Okay, the Malbim, commentator who lived about 200 years ago, he understands it differently. Okay, let me tell you what he says. Prior to the coming of the Mashiach, before the Jews' position in the world is firmly established, there are going to be terrible wars and massive destruction. Okay, this person who wrote it, Irvin Landau, in this particular one, said maybe that's actually happening now, given what's going on in the world. I don't want to go that far. All that will remain after this destruction is a tiny root. But the Malbim says a root begins as a tiny thing, a tiny bud, but can expand to support massive growth. And according to the Malbim, Habaim Yashresh Yaakov will be perot, fruit that will blossom and expand to encompass the entire world. And on that day, in the second verse of chapter 27, but that's earlier in Yeshayahu. Remember, we're in 30s. Oh, we are in 27. Sorry. So where is it? Oh, it's in the second verse. Let me go up. Sorry. I thought we're in 37. Bayomahu kerem chemer anula. On that day, they shall sing of it a vineyard of delight. Okay, not interesting. Sometimes they have interesting things in Svaria. So that's going backwards, and he's saying that's a play off of that those fruits that will come, they will allow us to put deep roots, and then we will blossom. So the third one is perot, fruit. So we had people, we had days, we have fruit. And then the last one, which I love, this is from the Gemara, I thought this was really beautiful, is that Habaim, those who come, are Talmidei Chachamim, sages, including women, of course, as well. Although I don't know if the Talmud said that. But, Talmidei Chachamim can include Talmidot Chachamot also, or Talmidot Chachamim, they both work. And this is what they say, a Talmid Chacham or Talmidah Chachama or Talmidat Chacham is recognized and respected in their own town. But when they go to a different town, they need to demonstrate their scholarship because people do not necessarily know who they are. Therefore, says the Talmud, the Torah scholars who come to Bavel, remember they're leaving Babylon, they're going outside of Israel, Habaim to Bavel, those who come to Bavel, outside of Israel, Babylonia, set down roots, Yashresh, by adding buds and blooms to the Torah. How beautiful is that? Those who come will put down roots. How? Because they will tell beautiful things about the Torah, buds and blossoms, and learn new Torah and new understanding. And then, umal'u p'nei tevel. Oh, that's what you were saying, tevel. I'm sorry. I thought you said olam. P'nei tevel is the word, world. Thank you very much, Lance. I didn't know you were referring to that because I was looking at the Hebrew. P'nei tevel, tevel is the whole world. And what this means, I think, is expanding Israel, outside of Israel, that Talmidei Chachamim have to go outside of Israel, and they'll be covered with fruit. What's the fruit? The learning of Torah. So what did you say about that you had said that, what did you say? What was Beiti,
my house, the house of prayer for all people. But go back to chapter 26, the last verse. I've got it right here.
I have it right here too.
Got it.
No, this sounds very hard. This is harsh. The Lord shall come forth from the Lord's place to punish. Okay, we're not up to punishing yet. Wait, hold that thought.
No, but all I'm saying is, Rabbanit Bracha, it says the dwellers of the earth. So, and the earth.
Yeah, but this is not talking about yet the dwellers of the, this is actually talking about Jews very clearly. Yaakov and Israel, and they will fill the world. So let's wait, hold that thought and see if it comes up, okay?
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, so we're good with this first pasuk? I don't know if you can already, the only connection so far that we saw to the parsha that I can think of is the Ba'im, the Elu Shemot B'nei Yisrael HaBa'im Mitzrayim. These are the names of the sons of Israel, the children of Israel, who came to Egypt. That's the connection so far. Now the Haftarah continues with a different topic. The prophet points out that the punishments God sent to the Jewish people were warnings to affect a change in their behavior. And here's where it might come up, Lance. And this is different from the way God punishes enemies. When dealing with the Jewish people, God actually holds back, according to this, and deals out the precise measure of hardship necessary to make them stop their wrongful deeds. So what's most important is idolatry. Now, it's always hard for us to connect with that because we don't, as I know, unless somebody here secretly worships an idol, we're not so familiar with idolatry. We don't worship Buddha, and we don't, it feels foreign to us. But this was a big deal, and a lot of the prophets really spoke about idolatry because for whatever reason, in the ancient world, that was how people connected with a deity, with very often, and they were all, so many times they were pulled to the culture of and the religions of the people around them. So let's read it.
Rabbanit Bracha, don't we worship Mammon?
I'm sorry, what don't we worship?
Don't we worship Mammon?
What's Mammon?
Mammon is material things, money.
Mammon. Mammon?
Right.
Oh, mammon is the Hebrew word. Is that an English word? Mammon? In Hebrew, it's mammon.
Yeah, I think, well, whatever. It means the same thing.
I think people make a statue and bow down to it. Is that what you're saying?
That's the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's not, okay, whatever. You want to say people call it their God. That's an interpretation. But I don't know if people would call it a religion and they say this money is instead of God. I don't know.
Well, it seems like
this is talking about a religion that they actually believe that these idols actually had powers and ran the world. And they would give them, I mean, look, I understand what you're trying to say, but I mean, you can connect it if you'd like. Okay. What? Go on. I thought. So you can hear the alliteration here in Hebrew. In kehereg harugav horag. So this is beautiful poetry in Hebrew. She has a different translation here. Was he scourged? How do you pronounce it? Scourged? Scourged, thank you. Was he scourged as his tormentors were scourged? Was he killed as his killers were killed? No, that's what they were explaining. Rather, here it says, was he beaten as his, so this is talking about Yaakov and Israel, Jews. A precise measure was sent to fight them, holding back the harsh roar on the day of the east wind. Okay, that's Pasuk 8. Okay, Lachen bezot yichupar avon Yaakov. So this is the message that Yaakov, or us, we Jews, or the Jews at the time, this is the message that we're supposed to glean from this, that we need to do tshuva. How? By making all the altar stones like shattered blocks of chalk, with no sacred post left standing, nor any incense altar, unless, of course, it was for our God. Okay? However, if the Jews do not stop, if they are not wise enough to realize their misfortunes are a warning from the Creator, they will be destroyed, and then their cities will be abandoned. So this is talking about two-step process. First, getting the warnings. Okay, and then, just a minute. Oh, that's in 28. Okay, thus fortified cities lie desolate if they don't do it, if they don't do tshuva, homesteads deserted, forsaken like a wilderness. There calves graze, there they lie down and consume its boughs. Continuing on, there's a lot here about, I'm just going to read it through. And if you see a connection, you are so welcome to say, when its crown is withered, they break. Second, its harvest is dried out, is broken. Women come take it for kindling. So these are descriptions of how dried out and how the land will be laid desolate. Why? Kilo ambinotu. This, by the way, is a play on the words in Ha'azinu, Am Chacham B'Navon, a nation that is wise and wise. There's two ways of saying smart and wise. So Bina is a play on words for what it says in Ha'azinu. Therefore, its maker will not have mercy on them, and its creator will not show them grace. Okay, or will deny them grace. This is kind of beautiful. V'haya b'yom hahu, it'll happen on that day. Yachbot Hashem. So chavita, by the way, this word avot is what we use to the aravot on Hoshana Rabbah. We beat them. It's the same word. Chibut aravot. Everybody with me on this? Tell me if you're not. Yachbot Hashem mishibolat hanaharat nachal Mitzrayim. The Lord will beat out the people like grain. How sad. From the channel of the Euphrates to the Wadi of Egypt. There we go. Here's another connection. Nachal Mitzrayim. What is Nachal Mitzrayim? What is the river of Egypt?
Nile.
So the Wadi, I think, is a dried riverbed, I believe, but it's, yeah, the Nilus, the Nile, which figures prominently in our parsha, right? Because Moshe was put into the Nahar and also into the Nilus, into the Nile River, and because Paro commanded that the baby boys be thrown in, and you shall be picked up one by one, O children of Israel. Okay. 1 second. But 1 second. Sorry, I apologize. I skipped. I forgot to say that this is about redemption. That even after that will happen, it's almost like out of love, God will pick each one of us up, pluck us, and save us. I mean, that is a beautiful thought. It makes me think of like, a mother animal who picks up the babies by the scruff of the neck when they need to be rescued and move them to a safe place. And this should be very familiar. Sound familiar? And maybe Yitaka b'shofar gadol. Anybody know that song? Maybe you know the next one. Uva'u ha'ovdim be'eretz ha'ashur v'hanidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim. Anybody know that song? Ve'ishtachavu l'Hashem behar hakodesh. No? Am I the only one who knows that song? Anybody? Oh, Robert, I got one yes. Faye?
Yes.
Birushalayim. Oh, Milton knows it. Yay. I think it's a cowbell song. Birushalayim. 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 So this is a beautiful song. Uva'u hovdim, those that were lost or made to be lost, they will be gathered, they will come. And that's the ba'im, I think, that Phyllis, you were talking about, that people come. The hanidachim, those who were expelled, that's what they use here. She uses far-flung ones. They will gather those that were expelled to Eretz Mitzrayim, which again, this represents out of Israel. Yishtachavu l'Hashem, they will bow down to God. B'har HaKodesh, Yerushalayim, in the holy mountain in Jerusalem. So this, it's going to constantly bounce back and forth between this is what's going to happen to you if you don't listen to God, and then afterwards it will hopefully get better. Okay. 28. No, it skips now. Is that true? Going now to...
It goes right on to 28.
Oh, here it is. Here's 28. I didn't see it. Okay. Going to 28. What's the next part? The prophet now describes the wealth, arrogance, and hedonism of the kingdom of Israel. And he warns that it's all about to be swept away. They will be trampled and swallowed up. Ephraim is the representation of the 10 tribes. Is that true? No, I think that's what it is. Let me just check. There's Ephraim. I did underline that.
Menashe for the 10.
Well, that's the brother of Menashe, yes, but Ephraim, the reason they're called Ephraim, 1 second, just give me a moment. I don't remember where I saw it, but Ephraim was the leading tribe. So that's why it's called Shikorei Ephraim, proud crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim. So obviously being drunk is not something that we aspire to. But Tzitz Novel Tzavi Tifarto, whose glorious beauties, but wilted flowers. Tiferet is glory and splendor. Asher al rosh geish shemanim halumei yain. So these are all very negative things who are overcome by wine and rich food. If we go back to Kohelet, by the way, remember what Kohelet said? You should drink water, you should drink simple things, have simple food. Kohelet did not believe, for those of us who learned Kohelet together with me, whenever it was 2 years ago, and it's about simplicity in life. And this follows this so beautifully, where he says, it's not about having rich food and about being drunk by wine. And just saying our shul is a dry shul for one. That's one of the reasons, because people sadly sometimes take it to the wrong direction and there are children available. So this is used as an example of the way they act. Continuing on to Hashem has might and strength, like a storm or a stream of hail, a destroying tempest, something like a storm of massive torrential rain. By the way, that's what's happening now in America, especially in California. I saw some really awful footage of landslides, and they're telling people to be really careful when they drive. I don't even know how you can be careful, because all of a sudden there's this huge landslide, which could crush a car. That comes down on the land. It will be trampled underfoot. Beraglayim teramasna, ateret keut shikorei Ephraim. Again, going back to the drunkards of Ephraim. And again, the wilted flowers, continuing, it repeats itself. The remainder of the Jewish people, those are in the kingdom of Yehuda, right? So that was Mamlechet, the 10 tribes. I think that was what it was. But the ones who remain, the Mamlechet Yehuda, Judah, will still have a chance to survive all this as long as they see God as their king and judge, the source of their strength. And that starts in verse 5. Vayom hahu, on that day, Yeshem tzvakot, God, that's another name for Hashem, la'ateret tzvi, a crown of beauty, u'litzfirat tifara, and I don't know how to pronounce this, of glory, diadem, for the remnant of the Jewish people, meaning there's still hope for those who aren't acting like that, from Mamlechet Yehuda, Judah, and a spirit of judgment for him who sits in judgment, and of valor for those who repel attacks at the gate. But sadly, Yeshayahu continues, the kingdom of Yehuda acts just like its neighbor Ephraim. Its leaders and teachers are drunk, irrational, and irresponsible. They are blind to the ugly consequences of their action. We're slowly getting to where it does connect a little bit more to what's going on in our parsha. They still, as you can see, this is what he says. Look at how many times he repeats it: wine and liquor, right? It's you see it so many times. Shechar and yain. He's really disparaging of people who get drunk and drink for that reason. They're muddled in their visions. They stumble in judgments, and their tables are covered in vomit and filth, and no space is left. So now, this is a little bit of a switch. The prophet now expresses his frustration at not being heard. There's no one to talk to except little children. Everyone else acts as if what he is saying is nonsense and gibberish. Even though what he's telling them will get them a reprieve from their troubles, they relate to it as if he's torturing them. They ignore him to their detriment. So here's something I want to point out to you. Et mi yoredea, to whom can I give it? Could he give, meaning the prophet? Give instruction. Bet mi yavin shema, who will understand a message, a shemua, something that you hear. Gimulei mechalav, those who are weaned from milk. Atikei mishadayim, those who were just taken away from the breast. So who can see a connection here to the parsha? Any thoughts? We talked about it a little bit.
Well, the business with Miriam getting Yocheved.
Exactly. Yep. So I want to read to you. So he's saying, I can only speak to little children. I can only speak. No, there were two ways of understanding it. One of them is, who can I speak to? They're acting like little children. They're not listening to me. Another way of understanding is that the only ones who could possibly save the Jewish people are the little children, because maybe they'll still listen to me. And that's the description. Wait, no, that wasn't what I was going to say. That's the connection to the parsha. So I want to read to you something, a medrash from the parsha, to tell you about this, okay?
Well, just
Yeah,
this
go
is
on.
this is kind of a leap, but also in the parsha, it's the beginning of the Jewish people. And so this would be like at the beginning when, before babies are tainted with things, and you can make changes and you can do things when it's so early. And so that would be the same.
It's a great connection, and in some ways feels a little better, but it is based on this textual connection of, and this was I think my favorite out of all the commentaries. That she actually went into detail. It's interesting, this was a woman. She actually went into a lot of detail about the connection. So I want to read you a couple of things. So again, we said two different ways, or at least two different ways. Phyllis just added a third. Whom can one teach knowledge? Who can understand what he hears just weaned babes drawn away from the breast? It's possible that his answer is actually a rhetorical question and should be read thus. Whom can I talk to? Nursery school children? It's also, and that would be sarcastic, but it's also possible it's not sarcasm, but rather a genuine answer. As I said before, there's still hope for children. Now, in order to highlight the innocence and trust of the children, Yeshayahu uses the imagery of nursing, of breastfeeding. It's not incidental. Why? So here's something, not many times, but sometimes, first of all, Moshe says about himself, how long can I carry this nation? I don't know if you remember that. And there's an imagery, like I'm like a mother who's suckling. Like I can't hold them like a mother with a baby, because we know a baby is completely dependent. Did you want to say something, Phyllis? No. Okay. So that is an imagery also for God that is used. And David HaMelech says it. Okay, 1 second. He says it in 131 Kuf Lamed Aleph. He says like this: my heart did not become conceited, my eyes did not become haughty. I did not walk in ways too great or too mighty for me. If I did not liken and compare my soul to a nursing infant with his mother, as a nursing infant was my soul. Okay, that's the parallelism there. In order to have a relationship of pure trust with God, David visualizes himself as a nursing infant looking up to his mother. I could show you a picture of my granddaughter. She's not quite 3 months old, and she absolutely looks adoringly at her mother. I mean, there's no question. Her mother is the main caregiver, and this is who she has complete trust. And that feels really beautiful. That feels like a nice, even though you could say, the prophet could be saying it to be disparaging, to be coming down hard on the Jews, and to saying you're not like that. And yet we also have two other ways, as we said. One of them is there's still hope because you still have children, and maybe they'll listen because they're still pliable. They're still willing to learn. And as Phyllis pointed out, maybe Bnei Yisrael and Mitzrayim, I mean, there is a connection with that. So I'm going to continue. 1 second. By using this image, Yeshayahu expresses his hope that the children who are only recently weaned, remember what I said, that they were recently, Gemulei Shadayim, they were recently weaned. That's what it says in the Haftarah. Retain their ability to trust others to provide them with what they need. I still remember my sister-in-law saying to me when her girls, who are now like 30 or whatever, and she said, when they were little, and she said, I love when they come to me and they still think I have all the answers in the world, because I know it's not going to be like that in a few years. And that's so true. That was so true. I mean, my kids were older at the time, and I said, that's so true, right? When they're little, they really think you have all the answers and they trust you. They totally trust us. Okay, now here's a midrash that's very, very beautiful. And we spoke about this a little bit. So remember the midrash that Miriam says to Bat Paro, shall I go call for you a nursemaid from the Jews, from the Hebrews? We weren't called Jews then. Why? The midrash notices that Miriam, there's like a gap in the psukim, because she takes Moshe and then Miriam approaches Bat Paro. We don't know if she approaches her right then or a little bit after. Maybe Bat Paro had with her some people who were nursing their own babies, so they had milk, and maybe they tried to give the milk to Moshe. Because why would Bat Paro agree to get a nursemaid from the Hebrews? Why? So the midrash fills in that empty space and says, well, maybe what happened was they tried Egyptian wet nurses and Moshe wouldn't take. Do you understand? That's the way midrash works. It sees a space in the text, a gap that's missing some information, and it fills it in a logical way. And that's why Rashi, by the way, often takes a midrash, which isn't you would think it's not the pshat, because he says, well, what's bothering Rashi? Rashi says, well, why take from the Hebrews? Oh, this is a good midrash that fills in that gap, okay? And then the midrash says, but the midrash continues that God said, this is from, that the mouth that will speak with the presence will nurse from something impure? How could that be? Moshe would not have been worthy to attain, sorry, I'm yelling, I get excited about this. I will lower my voice. It just makes it so beautiful the way it fits it. That the mouth that will speak to me and hear from me, how could that mouth nurse from non-Jewish milk, from a wet nurse who is not Jewish? And that Moshe, for all of his abilities and skill to hear to hear God, apologize. By the way, I heard a nice explanation for this this was about Abraham, but it could be about Moshe as well, that God is always broadcasting, always, but not all of us are able to tune into God's wavelength. Is that what you call it? We're not on the frequency. So Abraham was on the frequency. Yitzchak was sometimes on the frequency. Moshe was on the frequency. That maybe all of us would be able to attain the goal. But specifically about Moshe, I love that idea. But specifically about Moshe, that if he had nursed, like it just doesn't make sense to God that the mouth that would nurse from a wet nurse who was not Jewish would be able to speak to me. And that's based, this midrash is based on this pasuk that we just read in chapter 28. Whom can you teach knowledge? Just weaned toddlers drawn away from the breast. And the midrash continues, this is in Sota, in the Gemara Sota. That is, to whom should God teach knowledge, and who will understand what he hears? The one who refused to nurse. That would be Moshe. So here's a very nice connection between chapter 28 and Moshe. That feels like the most straightforward connection. And that might be why our sages chose this perek, this chapter. All right, I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Anybody have an idea? Suggestion, thought?
I have like a vague memory of the daughter of Pharaoh realizing that it had to be a Jewish child. So I'm like wondering, like, is she's a tool. She went the right way because she's God's tool, and she went where it needed to go.
I love that. That's always beautiful. She was the angel in that moment. Maybe the angel said, kind of whispered in her ear, so to speak, go down to bathe right now, today, this morning.
So it just seems like it was directed, that it didn't happen coincidentally.
Yeah, it's so specific. Actually, it's so interesting you said that, because one of the commentaries said something so beautiful. So there is more to the Haftarah, but he says like this. By the way, somebody gave me a gift, somebody from our community. It's a new book called Haftarah, and it's Parsha. Can people see that? So they were talking with Martin, my husband, on Shabbat, and they mentioned for some reason that they have this, that their friend put out this book. It's brand new. And Martin said, oh, Rabbanit Bracha might want to use it because she's teaching about Haftarah and the connections Parsha. So the next day they were in Brooklyn or Bar Park, and they bought me this as a gift, which was really, really sweet of them. And I was so excited to get this book, as you can imagine. So listen to this. Looking at the Parsha with the Haftarah in mind, we can see this is exactly what you said, Faye. I love this, by the way. Just notice, guys, that all of you pick up on things that I read. So, you're thinking logically, which I love. Looking at the Parsha with the Haftarah in mind, we see that the exodus from Egypt could easily have been delayed or obstructed. And remember what the Navi is saying. If you don't follow God's directive, you won't be saved. Although this is a little bit different, because this feels more like all the pieces fell into place. So I'm not sure that that's exactly, but just one second, that it could have been delayed by as many approaches and retreats as make up the Haftarah. So I think that the person writing it tried so hard to match it. So what did he say? The two midwives, remember the midwives? They had to not obey Paro's command and not kill all the baby boys. I don't know if you remember that story. Come to Shul, I'm talking about them as well, for those who can. I know it's hard to come when you live in a different city. I get that. But those who live here, plug for Name Tag Shabbat. Come for Shabbat. Hear my drasha. It's really interesting, actually. It's about a committee in our bayit that's special, that's been working for over a year, and I'm very excited to share about that. But I will put out the drasha on Sunday in the email, so you'll see it. And Name Tag Shabbat, you'll get a name tag, come down to have cool icebreakers and get to know other people. It's really, really, really nice. Okay. The next thing, Pharaoh's daughter, look at you, Faye, you're right here in his book, what you just said. That Pharaoh's daughter had to rescue Moshe from the Nile, even though she knew he was a Hebrew boy, and saving him was contrary to her father's law. 3, as a young man, Moshe had to wander out of Pharaoh's court. Remember, Vaigdal Moshe, he grew up and he wandered out. Remember, we told that story, that had to happen. And then he chose to kill an Egyptian officer to protect the Hebrew man, even though he risked execution and exile. And then the death of Pharaoh, who had initiated the oppression, and new Pharaoh sat on the throne. The children of Israel may have hoped that the new king would end the oppression, but only when that didn't happen did they cry out in pain, asking for God's assistance. So all of these pieces had to happen. Okay. And one more thing, let me write this. This was number 5. I actually numbered them in my book. Just a minute. This is beautiful. So Faye, tell me what you think of this. You said she was a tool. So look at what he's suggesting. God may have intended that Moshe should free Israel, but God did not command Moshe to approach the burning bush. Moshe had to act out of his own curiosity and go out of his way to see this extraordinary sight. So here's the question. Maybe it needed to happen with Bat Paro, and maybe if Bat Paro had not gone down, it would have happened a different way. I don't know. Does God guide people's hands, mamash, like literally? I don't know. But it did have to happen.
That she had to know that there's only one reason for a child to be floating in the water. She knew what she's picking up. She had to know.
Right. No, 100%. But why did she go down and why did she open the and not kill the baby? If you want to know the answer to that, come to show. I'm not talking about it anymore because I'm going to talk about it in show. Okay. And there's more. So here, I just want to suggest to you, I want to give you what he said. We're almost at the end. Taking the Parsha and Haftarah together, we see three ideas in the Parasha that Yeshayahu thought were important. The first, that God had long ago promised to bring Israel out of later exiles. Yeshayahu could think this because he and later generations possessed knowledge that had been deliberately withheld from the Parsha's generation. So we know that in retrospect is what he's saying. But so what he's suggesting is think of the people in Yeshayahu's generation, think of the people in Mitzrayim. They don't have knowledge of what's going to happen afterwards. They have to have belief. I think that's a beautiful connection as well. It's a setting. It's a connection of the setting. Does that make sense? And at any time that could be about not having the knowledge afterwards. What else is second? By asking his generation to remove all the idols and the signs and practices, Yeshayahu was telling his generation to follow the example of this parasha's generation when it cried out to God and connected to God, okay? And that's what happened. That's what could happen, that if you could just do what Bnei Israel did and reach out and cry out to God, God is ready to listen to you. And finally, speaking to Israel's spiritual condition, regardless of whether Israel lived in exile in the Promised Land. So let's go back and say, might as well read the rest of the Haftarah. By the way, these are all thoughts for you to think of when you either are in shul or you read it at home on Shabbat. What's the connection? I hope I'm sparking some thoughts about this. So we got over the milk. We don't have to talk about the nursing anymore. This, I just have to read it to you in Hebrew because it's so beautiful. Ki, tzav latzav, tzav latzav, kav lakav, kav lakav, ze'er sham. And you can read the English by yourself. And then it continues later. Truly, as one who speaks to that people in stammering jargon and an alien tongue, I wonder if that also could be about Moshe. Remember, it was hard for him to speak. Asher amar alehem zot hamenucha. Wait 1 second, I just want to make sure I don't go past the last 28:13. Yep, one more. This is the resting place at the weary rest. This is a place of repose. They refuse to listen, and then it goes back to it. V'haya lehem devar Hashem tzav latzav, tzav latzav, kav lakav, kav lakav, ze'er sham. Mutter upon mutter, murmur upon murmur. Now here, now there, so they will march, but they shall fall backward and be injured and snared and captured. So that's the sad thing, is that if you don't listen to this, if you don't listen to the words, if you're not listening to what I tell you, you will not be rescued. Then we jump to the left, but so that's sad, right? But remember what we said, we want to finish with something positive. Positive that we finish with is 29:22. Did I miss it? 28, nope, still on 28, 29, go to 22. Lachen ko amar Hashem el Beit Yaakov. So we're going back to Yaakov. Yaakov is the first pasuk, was at the beginning. The children of Yaakov, God said to Beit Yaakov, Asher padat Abraham, this is the same God who rescued, redeemed Abraham. Where? Nope, doesn't say. Lo ata yevosh Yaakov. Now, no, we will not be shamed, or maybe dried up. It's a similar root. V'lo ata panav yechavaru. No longer will we be shamed. This would be the parallelism between Yevosh and Yechavaru, that their faces will be white. Ki vir'oto yeladav ma'aseh yadai b'kirbo yakdishu shemi v'ikdishu et kadosh Yaakov Et Elohei Yisrael yaritzu. Again, using Yaakov and Israel for when he, that is his children, behold what my hands have wrought in his midst, they will hallow my name. Men will hallow the Holy One of Jacob and stand in awe of the God of Israel. By the way, also Yaakov, the Ele Shemot b'nei Israel. So God, Yaakov's name is mentioned as Israel right at the beginning of the parsha. So those are the connections. Perhaps anybody has a thought before we say goodbye. If more different, yes, Lance.
Rabbanit Bracha.
Yes, please, please.
Where is Joseph, and why is Joseph never mentioned?
What do you mean? He died. Is that what you mean?
No. Joseph is central to Genesis. I mean, Joseph is the culmination of Genesis.
Yeah.
Look at.
Well, I'll tell you
50.
why. No, but Lance, I'll tell you why. Because Yaakov's children comprise the Jewish nation. Yosef's children are a small part. But Yosef is mentioned, remember, because his bones are brought up, and that's a big deal.
But it's chapter 50, verses 18 and 19.
Are you talking about in Genesis?
Yeah, Genesis.
So what about that?
Well, it's there that Joseph says, it's God's plan, God is in charge, and God started out by punishing me, making my life miserable, and then he delivered me to a much higher level.
Okay,
and
but
he's
what?
gonna do
No,
that
I understand that, but what's your
with
question?
Jacob's progeny. In other words, that's the plan for Jacob's progeny in
No,
Genesis.
I understand that, but what? So here's what I'm not understanding your question. When we talk about the nation of Israel, the top node is Yaakov. Yosef is one of the sub-nodes. Am I not making myself clear? I just want to describe
No,
it.
but it's Yosef ben Mashiach.
No, now you lost me. Yosef, the son of Mashiach?
There are two in Judaism, there are two messiahs.
Whoa, wait a second. One second. This is a whole different topic. It's going completely off the route. I think you're talking about future, that there'll be Mashiach ben Yosef or Mashiach ben David. That's something else. I thought you were asking why Yosef
isn't part of Isaiah? I mean, the Christians.
No, but it's not part of this particular chapter. I mean, I was reading the Haftarah. So.
But you talk about it just bothers me. You talk about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but never Joseph. Why?
I don't know never, Joseph. When you say never, I don't know enough of Isaiah to say never. Yosef is mentioned many.
We don't say Joseph.
Well, okay, okay, 1 second. Can we just take that? That's an off topic. We can talk about it another time. And by the way, there is a Haftarah that says it's Ephraim, that talks about Ephraim and Menashe, his children. But you're asking a completely different question. I prefer to stay, if possible, such questions for over time. The connection between
Joseph mentioned in Exodus 1?
I'm sorry?
Is Joseph mentioned in Exodus 1 that he dies?
No, he died in Bereshit at the very end, the last pasuk in Bereshit. He already died last week.
There's no reference to Joseph in Exodus 1.
I didn't say that. I said it doesn't refer that he died. I don't know that it refers that he dies, you asked me. He died already. He died. It does say.
Is the name Joseph in Exodus?
Yes, because it says that a new king Pharaoh rose up who did not know Yosef. But can we not go off topic? That feels completely off topic.
But you want to make connections to the Parsha, Rabbanit Bracha.
From the Parsha to the Haftarah.
Yeah, okay, it's a connection, right? But where is the connection between Joseph and the Haftarah?
I don't know. Do you see one?
That's the problem. That's my problem.
Why is that a problem? Okay, I'm sorry. That's what the sages chose. In other words, you're saying Joseph. You don't like that they pick this one. You would have preferred they pick a different one. I'm looking for where there are connections, not where there are not connections. You're saying that you don't think this is complete enough. You feel that they should have picked a pasuk or a chapter that doesn't just connect to the status of the Jews in Mitzrayim, but that connect to Yosef. Okay, I hear that.
No. But the problem that is.
1 second. Is it relevant to our
this ignorance? This ignorance
Lance.
is ubiquitous.
I know, but why? But okay, so I hear that. I just think it's off topic. That's all. It's its own research that doesn't have to do with this. You're pointing out that you feel that Yosef should be mentioned more. Okay, I hear that. I don't have an answer for you.
That Yosef is more important than Moses. Moses.
But Lance. Sorry, time out. This doesn't have to do with our class. So this is a different time. Well, if you want to have this discussion, let's have it at another time. Okay, not in a class that we're thinking of the connections between the Parsha and the Haftarah. You have a different thing that you wish Yosef was mentioned more.
Yes,
in.
I'm
I
doing
get it.
lateral thinking, and that's something that you don't see, I guess.
No, I might see it. It's just not relevant to our class. That's all.
But that's the point of lateral thinking. It's thinking out of the box.